Good afternoon, Mark. And this is our series for WiCCD. It's called Who Cares? This is our second episode, and I'm actually very happy and excited to have my guest here today, Mark Geragos. I mean, Mark, you need no introduction. I think we see you everywhere on TV, on the internet, on YouTube, even on Extra recently. I've never seen you on Extra before, but you were there like just last week. So
I actually get a kick out of Billy Bush. So whenever Billy texts me, I usually respond.
But I'm very, very happy to have you today on this show. I'm a fan of your show, Beyond a Reasonable Doubt and Reasonable Doubt. So very honored to have you and that you're taking the time to chat a bit with me about high profile cases, because you are the go-to lawyer for high profile cases. You've represented so many celebrities and famous and infamous people like Susan McDougal, Scott Peterson, Michael Jackson, Chris Brown, Colin Kaepernick, Jussie Smollett, and you are now a celebrity on your own, like regardless of who you're.
Although it's I hate when I'm called a celebrity lawyer. So that's the only thing I'll ask is don't call me a celebrity lawyer. So
all right. Well,
in fact, I will tell your audience beforehand that you would ask me, do I represent non-celebrities? And I would say yes, 80% are non-celebrities, and I enjoy that actually.
Well, that's nice to hear. And I mean, thank you so much, Mark, for being here with us today. So I'm going to start by asking you, Mark, was this status that you've achieved now of representing celebrity and high profile cases, was this intentional or did it just happen by chance? Tell us, how did you get to this place?
Well, look, I've always wanted to handle large, high stakes cases. I mean, that's always been something that I wanted to try cases growing up. I watched my father, who was my hero, he was a prosecutor. I used to tag behind him as a kid when he was a DA. And while I was waiting for bar results, he had an incredible back-to-back series of trials, 2 death penalty cases sandwiched in between with a Armenian freedom fighter case that was in federal court, where he tried it with 2 famous lawyers at the time, Charles Gary and Leonard Weinglass, and watching the 3 of them try that case while I was waiting for my bar results was incredible. And so I've always had a dream of being able to try high stakes kind of, I know people call them now bet the company. I do a fair amount, in fact, probably more civil than I do criminal now. And I will tell you that one of the reasons I like civil is you're only dealing with other people's money. And so there isn't as much pressure. One of the things about criminal is you're dealing with the people's liberty. I call it liberty court. It's not money court. And so that's a real high stakes, because it's somebody's life that's in your hands.
Although, I mean, because you do civil and criminal, I have a feeling that sometimes people get more angry when it comes to their money than to their life.
There's a famous, I don't know if anybody knows the old comedian who's long since died, Jack Benny. Jack Benny used to have a routine, and his routine was that a robber came up from behind him, put a gun to his head, and said, "Your money or your life." And he just stood there. And they said, "Your money or your life?" And he said, I'm thinking. Yeah. And so that old joke actually pertains to a lot of clients that I have had over the years.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes civil litigation can be more aggressive than criminal law, I find.
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny you mention that, because people will often say, don't you get scared in the criminal law, the people you deal with? And I said, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
The criminal law is a cakewalk compared to the family law court. That's where lawyers and judges get shot, is in family law.
I agree, totally agree. I never practiced in family, but I know from speaking to family lawyers that it
I
could
did it
be.
once and I said, get
Yeah.
out of here. I'm not going to do that again. No amount of money is worth it.
Well, okay, but going back then to criminal law and the high profile cases. So you have tons of experience dealing with these cases. How different and how more, and are they must be more challenging. They come with their own challenges as opposed to other ordinary cases. So if you can maybe tell us a bit, Mark, about the differences between a regular criminal case and a high profile case.
Well, part of what you have in a high profile case, and I always say there is almost an element of three-dimensional chess. You have your standard, you have to deal with the case itself, the facts, the law,
Right.
and the parallel investigation. So that's something you have to deal with in any case. Then you've got in a high profile case that usually is a byproduct of the fact that you have a high profile client. And most of the time, that's somebody who has a coterie of people around him, management agents, maybe his usual lawyers. So you have that world that you have to deal with. Then you have the media, the outward facing. So you have that component, and you have to always be cognizant of the fact that I'm dealing with the case itself. I'm also dealing with anything that I do is going to be dissected in the media, which will then have an effect on the third kind of stakeholder in this. And so there is a constant interplay with the overriding concern that first and foremost, you have the client's interests at heart. And so that makes it, a little bit, it's more consuming, if you will.
Right. And okay, so there are several things that you mentioned here that I maybe would like you to explore a bit more. So, because you did mention that these high profile and celebrity clients, they tend to have managers and they have an entourage surrounding them.
You call it entourage, which is much nicer. I call it their posse.
Yeah. But okay, so but you're not necessarily dealing with them on their own. So is it easy or is it more challenging to get instructions? Do you have direct access to the client, or do you have to deal with the manager, the director, I don't know who else is present, or can you still have direct communication with the client?
I have been very fortunate to always have the ability to talk directly to the client. I insist on that. I have it one-on-one, and I always will counsel the people around them. Look, I'm here. I parachute in. I'm out. I'm what I call a one-off. I'm not here to practice entertainment law. I'd rather sell oranges on the side of the freeway than do that. And so don't worry about me. I'm here to get you in, get you out.
Okay, so it is possible to have that one-on-one relationship with the client. Okay, because I mean that's important for solicitor-client privilege as well. I mean, if you
correct, because that's another, it's one of the beauties. A lot of people think it's a detriment. I think it's one of the advantages is you just say, look, I can't have you here. You don't want to be a witness. Let me just deal with the client.
Yeah. And it builds a relationship of trust between you and the client. If you
have to have that. Remember, we're not, you and I are not that different than an oncologist when somebody's got a horrific medical diagnosis. You need that back and forth. You need to be able to comfort if you can, or at least speak directly and give them what the actual diagnosis is.
Right. Okay. And then another thing that you did mention in these cases is, of course, the media is usually, the media will get involved. And there's always this noise that comes with the media, the comments that you read. And so how do you deal with this noise? Like when you're dealing with the case, I mean, it must be challenging and not to get affected by the comments that you read in the media. So what do you do, Mark?
Over 20 years ago, actually 20 years this year, when I was doing Scott Peterson, and that was probably the baptism by fire with Susan McDougal, she had a constituency. She was hated to some degree in certain quarters. but she also was beloved in many others. And I think she was able to navigate that. Scott had it was literally the most hated man, if not in the US, arguably in most kind of true crime arenas. And I used to laugh when we had Michael and it was announced the website crashed from so many people coming to the website. We actually had a website back then. But that was the most people well-wishing. When it was Scott, it was most people wishing I would get cancer. So, you get, after going through that, the kind of hate that you get now, even the internet hate, it really is not
more intense.
It is more intense, but there are constituencies now. So I find that one of we currently, the office, Tina Glandian, who's my partner in New York, represents the Tate brothers, who were up until recently held without charges in Romania. And even though they're controversial or polarizing, it wasn't even close to what the kind of the Peterson hate direction was. So I don't want to say that we have become callous, but I've certainly learned that there is a certain element of people who are always going to throw rocks your direction, but that's usually people who are not in the arena and they're not fighting and they're not actually doing anything. I remember in college, I had a very close friend in college who was back then he was a brilliant mind, and he has since gone on to become a world famous author. And he used to just be vicious in his criticism of critics. And I used to just marvel at how he would talk about the people who would criticize and how it was because they were no good talent. They had very little talent. And he's proven that right in the sense that he's gone on, and I won't mention who he is. I just reconnected with him in the last couple of years. But I kind of adopted his if they're criticizing, it's usually because they can't do. So that's how I deal with it.
But I find the most frustrating thing in these cases is that the criticism will start even before the case itself starts. It's just from the moment the person is charged, it's automatically there's this opinion that the person is guilty or the person deserves to be in jail. I mean, we've seen it with the Tate brothers. You mentioned them already. They're very polarizing. There are people who love them and people who hate them. And those who hate them, they already think that they should be in prison. But I mean, there aren't even
right. And not only that, they want them in prison because they don't like the things they've said.
Their thoughts and
weird, their thoughts. That it's one of the. I was just talking. You mentioned the podcast Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. I was just talking about the fact one of the dilemmas, if you will, for lack of a better term, about being a criminal defense lawyer, who also traditionally is kind of more liberal or left, is that this pursuit of Trump has put us as criminal defense lawyers in somewhat of a box in the US, because many of the prosecutorial methods that we abhor are being utilized in seeking out his prosecution. And so you find that as a liberal Democrat, this is repulsive to you from an ideological perspective.
Right.
And there's a certain amount of ideological schizophrenia involved, if you will. I mentioned Susan McDougal. Many of the excesses that I was complaining about in the 90s in regards or vis-a-vis Bill Clinton and the Whitewater investigation, because Susan was the ex-business partner of Bill and Hillary Clinton. And she was being prosecuted by a so-called independent counsel. And the excesses of that are what ended up letting the independent counsel statute here in America expire. But that is now, and you're watching the same thing happen in reverse, where the the Republican side of the aisle is now complaining about this kind of special counsel pursuit of Trump. And they say, well, guys, remember back in the 90s, you didn't have a problem with it when it was directed at Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton.
I mean, and we see this more in the US, that politics tend to be more involved in when
I call it the
yeah.
criminalization of politics.
And it makes, I guess it makes your job as a criminal defense lawyer more difficult, right? I mean,
well, it certainly is not easier. I mean, you tend to
yeah,
find, I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about before. When you're managing this three-dimensional chess, if you
yeah,
will, game, you still, there's somebody, especially when you believe it's a political prosecution, then that also gives an added layer of things to consider. What kind of, how do I frame the defense? How do I frame the argument or the pushback from what the prosecutor is doing in terms of both the criminal defense, the political defense, and whatever arena that this is
public
being digested
opinion
in.
as well.
Correct.
Yeah. And so do you think, Mark, because I mean, you've been practicing law for uh
40 years next month. So yes,
well,
so
congratulations.
age me. So
But I mean, and so, but you've been, I mean, you've seen the evolution of the practice of criminal law. I mean, you've been practicing before social media, before the internet, and now with that. Do you think it's more difficult now to practice criminal law, or is it easier, or is it both?
well, it's interesting. I've watched the pendulum swing. When I started, that was in California at least, that was the advent of three strikes. And that was the advent of, I mean, there were years, I'm not exaggerating, where every case I tried had a life top, meaning you were facing somebody arguably going away for the rest of their life, even if the offense itself wasn't what you would think is a life top case. That is a crazy amount of kind of pendulum swing. Then we see it swing back. And now we're, at least in California, swinging back again to where I was noticing also in New York that the governor here in New York is now talking about revisiting no cash bail. The governor is talking about public safety. Democrats who traditionally were kind of the friends of the one side of the criminal justice system are now triangulating and going in the opposite direction. So I don't know. I think we're in a seismic shift once again. It's happening, but I see the pendulum swing happening much quicker, but it's happening.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think, I don't know if in the US it's the same thing, but here in Canada, I mean, there has been an impact since COVID. I mean, the courts are emptier compared to how they used to be before because many of the proceedings are by Zoom right now. So it must be more difficult, I think, now for new lawyers to build a network and connect with other lawyers. So I don't know, but there's social media as well. That's something that didn't exist. And do you find that social media has helped you in your practice? And
I say it certainly is not hurt. It certainly is
okay.
not hurt. So I think that, and I'll tell you why. There is to any in a high profile case, it is amazing to me how often you get a tip or something. I mean, you know, out of 100 crazy things that come in, sometimes one or two has been helpful, and helpful in the sense that you can follow up a thread that is helps out on the defense. So I would say, all in all, as crazy as some people get in these cases, it has been, it's a net positive.
Okay, and is there a case, you don't have to name the case, but are there cases that you regret having taken on, or no regrets?
No, I think I've learned something, even cases where, you know, I often say when you win, and I've had long winning streaks, you get too cocky, I think, in a way. you learn a lot more from a loss, from the
From the loss.
postmortem of a loss, than you do from the wins. So no, there's no regrets. I mean, do I do I have second thoughts? Usually the second thoughts is about jury selection. I mean, it's amazing to me how much jury selection determines the case itself at trial. I it's very rare for me to have regrets about cases that resolve before trial, whether it's civil or criminal. I think that generally the results that we achieve, both criminal and in civil, I'm pretty satisfied with. You get a six.
So, sorry, we lost the connection for a few moments, but welcome back. Thank you, Mark. So, I just have one last question that I wanted to ask you is if you have any tips that you can give for new lawyers who would like to or who aspire to have a career like yours, what do you say, what would you tell them?
I tell this to my new lawyers that I have, and when I lecture new lawyers, I go watch trials and then do trials. And when I say go watch trials, when I'm in California, I'll tell them which courthouse to go to, and there's usually a trial hub. Go there, watch the trial calendar, find somebody that you think looks interesting or that you think you would like to watch, and follow them when they get sent out to trial and watch a trial, watch back-to-back trials. Well, I mentioned earlier, while I was waiting for my bar results, I watched my father try 3 cases back to back. That was better than anything. Those 3 cases and watching them was better than 3 years of law school in terms of the trial practice and watching different styles, watching people who were trying cases, watch the kind of interplay with the judges and cross-examination. And by the way, if you want to be a criminal defense lawyer, you're going to make or break on cross-examination. So watch people do it. And then you don't necessarily imitate, but at least watch and learn and absorb. And I can't tell you anything better than that. That's a secret.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. It was really my pleasure to meet you today and to have you as my guest. Hopefully, we'll get to have you on other shows as well, and maybe one day we'll get to meet you in person. I hope so. So thank you so much for your time.
So do I. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.